Global protein demand is set to double by 2050, and this could be a climate disaster, but it could also be great news for the planet and for profit if we look to alternative proteins to drive food security while cutting carbon. While we are witnessing alternative proteins capture billions in investment and headlines, the path to mass adoption is still riddled with scientific, regulatory, and consumer hurdles. At Climate Group, we work with governments, corporates, academia, and other experts on shifting public food demand towards lower carbon protein diversification. Governments, for instance, can and should procure the food for their schools, their hospitals, their prisons, etc., in a healthier, lower carbon way, and companies can help them achieve that. When we talk about protein diversification, we mean a focus on plant forward, so less animal proteins and more plant-based proteins. This could be pulses, cereals, soya products, as well as blended products and meat and dairy alternatives. In the run-up to Climate Week NYC, where there are dozens of sessions on food and agriculture, we talk with several experts on this topic. And today we talk with Dr. Stacy Pyett, Program Manager Proteins for Life at Wageningen University. Stacy, thank you for joining us. Welcome.
My pleasure.
Can you tell us first what Wageningen University is and what it does, and what your division or team is working on in terms of food and protein diversification?
Sure. Wageningen University Research is an academic institution in the Netherlands. We are known worldwide for our work in agriculture and food systems. And my personal function is program manager, which is a bit vague function, but in fact, I'm strategically responsible for overseeing our work in the domain of sustainable food, including proteins and the protein transition. I also work with a team on other topics that we consider important for climate, such as, for example, food loss and waste and climate resilient food supply chains.
So when we talk about a protein shift or a protein diversification, it needs governments and corporates to change, to sell and procure better food. It also needs consumers to buy and eat that better food. So the role of the consumer is very important. In your opinion, what are the most effective ways to shift consumer behavior towards more sustainable food choices, and why does it matter for the planet?
Well, to start with that last part about why it matters, a quarter of our global greenhouse emissions are associated or can be associated with the food and food production. And the most impactful food that we produce are animal source foods, and in particular, red meat. So it's very clear that if we want to achieve our climate goals, we need to do something in shifting our diets. When we talk about achieving a diet shift for consumers, I always like to start with what clearly doesn't work. And what doesn't work is telling people what to eat. We always think, an education campaign or, telling people this diet is good for you and good for the planet, but we know that doesn't work. We've already been communicating nutritional guidelines, etc. And in general, when we tell people what to eat and why they should be eating something, by and large, the global response is irritation. We don't want to be told that is something we choose for ourselves. The good news is we do know some things that work that are under our control. Number one, extremely impactful, is change the default. So we know that somewhere between 60 and 70% of people just go with the default. And we've done tests where we've had a menu that said you can have a chicken burrito, or if you want to change, you can have a bean burrito. And then we flipped it around. We said you can have a bean burrito, or if you want to change, you can have a chicken burrito. It doesn't matter what the default is. 60 to 70% of people take the default. So if the default is vegetarian, we get 70% of the people to eat vegetarian. That's great. That's super impactful and relatively easy to achieve. The second thing that we know works is inviting people to connect with their own values, not telling people what values they should have. So we did an intervention where we tested different sort of questions and posters to see what would impact people's food choice. And the most impactful single question was, do you care about animal welfare? There was a poster. It wasn't in your face. It was just sort of nearby a food canteen. And it said, do you care? It's not you should care. It's not shaming or blaming. It's just an invitation to connect inside yourself. What matters to you? And we know that talking about values and inviting people into their own values is very impactful. And the last thing we know works, although it's a bit broader concept and a bit abstract for some people, is changing the food environment. And by food environment, we mean that context in which we make choices. And people tend to think, oh, but I choose my own food products. But we all honestly know that you choose that in an environment that is highly managed. I mean, billions of dollars are put into food marketing and food placement. It's not a coincidence. If a product is at eye level in the supermarket, that position has been bought and paid for. And when we change that environment, we also know that it matters. When we make healthy, sustainable choices, more accessible, easier, more prominent, when we use store promotions, when we use store recipes, all of that is impactful too. And that's a very important role for industry, for stakeholders, for policymakers and retail to get involved in making our food choice environment support the sustainable choice.
So there's a role for consumers, there's a role for corporates. What is the role for governments in this space? So does it need, for instance, more policy change or a change in messaging from governments?
That's a great question. And there are a number of levers that governments can pull. There are a number of levers that are also just politically unpalatable. Sometimes conversations pop up around a meat tax, for example, but that's probably just realistically not going to get done. But there are other measures that governments can take that are easier to do and absolutely not polarizing in this way. So, for example, one of the direct things that governments can do is work on their own public procurement. That is important because it is a first market. It's a starting point for many suppliers of plant-based or alternative products. It's a way to expose people to these foods and to sort of get the ball rolling, let's say. There are also less direct things that governments do. So most governments do have science programs to fund R&D work. We love to see them putting their money behind creating, alternative protein, sustainable food, investing in that through R&D budgets. And there are also sort of the least direct interventions, but governments are also very powerful conveners. So bringing together actors from the food system, including retailers, including food producers, and having a dialogue and encouraging, or even just setting a goal, setting out a vision of, hey, we would like to see our diet look like this in 2030 or 2050. I think those can be very powerful, even if they're rather soft measures.
Is the role of a university such as Wageningen University also one to help convening, so to help governments connect to corporates, to retailers, to food service companies?
Our main role is delivering science, and we want to stick to that. We think it's important that there be solid science, whether that be social science and understanding consumer behavior, or the hard technology and producing alternative proteins. How do we do so at scale, under cost, et cetera? But yes, of course, we find it an important activity as scientists to engage in the societal dialogue, to be present, and to share whatever we have to share as prominently and publicly as possible.